Some people don't stop reaching out because they want to end a friendship. They stop reaching out because they need to see if the other person will ever reach back. And we all know how that experiment usually ends. You stop initiating, and suddenly there's just silence. And that silence confirms the exact fear you've been carrying around for years. From the outside, it probably just looks like you're drifting apart or getting busy with life. But a lot of the time, that isn't what's happening at all. You're not drifting. You're waiting. You stop sending the first text of the day. You stop being the one who plans the weekend drinks. You stop checking in to see how their week is going. You stop sending the funny reels or asking about their work stress. And then a few days pass, and then a week. And then maybe a whole month of zero contact. And the realization hits you that this relationship wasn't actually a two-way street. It was a performance that you were funding entirely with your own energy. And I think it's one of the most quietly painful things a person can experience. There was a Saturday night a few months ago where I was just sat at my phone on the sofa. I hadn't texted anyone for a month just to see what would happen. And my screen was totally blank. No notifications, no check-ins, nothing. And it's not just me or you. They call it the friendship recession now. Like, the number of people with no close friends at all has quadrupled since 1990. And over half of adults didn't even make a new friend last year. When you hit your 30s, the structural scaffolding of life just kind of collapses. You're not in dorms or shared offices as much anymore. Friendship stops being something that just happens to you by proximity. It becomes this deliberate, exhausting effort. And if you're the only one making that effort, it's incredibly draining. And because social media creates this ambient closeness, it gives you the illusion that you're connected just because you're watching someone's stories. And we've all heard of this. But scrolling past a photo doesn't mean they actually know what your face looks like at 2 a.m. when things fall apart. And the hard thing to admit is that when you finally stop making that effort, it does give you something. It gives you relief. Relief from being the group planner. Relief from constantly monitoring other people's moods to make sure they're having a good time. Relief from being a professional mirror, just reflecting everyone else's needs back at them so perfectly that no one ever bothers to ask what's happening behind your eyes. When you have an anxious nervous system, you overfunction in relationships to protect you from abandonment. You become the reliable listener because deep down you feel like you have to constantly prove your value to stay in their life. So when you finally put that heavy burden down, your body just sighs. But the problem is, what starts as a break from performing can slowly turn into a habit and into isolation. And habits are dangerous when they make life smaller. Because when you stop reaching out and nobody reaches back, your social world physically shrinks. And the silence they leave behind actually hurts. Like, physically hurts. There's this thing called the pain overlap theory. It basically shows that social rejection and physical pain light up the exact same regions in the human brain. When you realize you've been fundamentally unseen by your circle, your brain processes it like a physical injury. And it's not a metaphor, it's real pain. And the longer you sit in that quiet, empty space, the more the isolation starts to feel like a permanent reality. You start retreating even further because the rejection is just too raw to risk feeling again. And you end up in this weird paradox where you're absolutely heartbroken that they didn't reach out, but also relieved that you don't have to pretend anymore. You can feel lonely and still not want to see anyone. You can miss people and still ignore them. You're completely alone, but at least you're safe from the disappointment. And slowly, your life just loses its colour. You stop having new experiences. You stop feeling involved in anything outside your own head. But the real danger is what that silence starts doing to your identity. Because society, it doesn't really give us a script for grieving a friendship that just fades away. There's no funeral or public ritual or closure. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss. It's just this chronic, unresolvable uncertainty that sits heavy in your chest. And because no one talks about it, you start to internalize the silence. You start thinking, was I just not interesting enough? Was I just convenient for them when they needed someone? And that's when it gets really dark. Because you don't just feel lonely anymore. You start feeling like you are fundamentally unlovable. Like there's a flaw in your actual identity that makes people not want to stick around. I've had days where I've just laid in bed convincing myself that I was entirely forgettable. That if I didn't constantly initiate, I would just cease to exist in other people's minds. And chronic loneliness actually reduces the grey matter in your brain in the areas that process social cognition. So prolonged isolation literally changes how your brain processes social information. You're not just losing friends, you're losing the capacity to feel like you belong anywhere. And when you lose trust in your own worth like that, your nervous system goes into hypervigilance. You start scanning every tiny interaction for signs of micro-rejection. A delayed text or a red receipt feels like a massive threat. And eventually, you just stop trying altogether. You start believing that you're just someone who is meant to be alone. Someone who just can't hold on to people. You start feeling like you're failing at the most basic human experience. Absolute failure. But I don't think that's true at all. I don't think you're broken, and I don't think you're forgettable. If you stopped reaching out and the connection died, that's not rejection of your value. It's just the sound of an illusion breaking. It's a data point about the infrastructure of that relationship. You're not manipulative for testing the waters. You were just using a nervous system survival strategy to see if you were actually safe. And the fact that they didn't meet you halfway is not your fault. A recent study from Cornell University looked at thousands of adults over a decade, and they found that it's not the actual number of friends you have that determines your health or your longevity. It's social asymmetry. It's the gap between the connections you have and whether you actually feel seen by them. Having a massive contacts list full of one-sided friendships is actually worse for your body than having a tiny circle of real ones. You were carrying the whole weight of that connection. And letting it drop wasn't a failure. It was an act of self-protection. It's like pruning a tree. Cutting away draining surface level ties isn't abandonment. It's the ability to judge well. It's making room for the people who actually want to meet you halfway. And I know the empty space left behind is terrifying, but I don't think the answer is to rush out and try and force new relationships to fill the void. I think the first step is much, much smaller than that. It's just learning to tolerate the emptiness for a little while. Just sitting with the truth of what that friendship was and what it wasn't. You don't need to make 10 new friends tomorrow. You just need to stop punishing yourself today for letting a dead connection finally fall away. Because the silence they left behind isn't a punishment. It's the first honest square footage you've had in a really long time. And while the truth is lonely, it's also the only place where you can actually start to build something real. You deserve to be reached out to. You deserve to be missed.